This podcast will cover a portion of your ecology unit notes on food chains and food webs. It's always a good idea when you watch a podcast to have your notes downloaded to Notability and split screen. This file is called the Ecology Unit Notes. Okay, we are going to be talking about the difference between food chains and food webs in this podcast. The image that you see here shows a food chain. A food chain shows the pathway of energy being transferred from one organism to another by showing who is eating and who is being eaten. You can see the pathway starts with algae. Algae is a producer or autotroph and creates its own food through photosynthesis. Producers are always going to be at the base of every food chain. The algae is then eaten by the flagfish. The largemouth bass now eats that flagfish. The anhinga, which is a large bird, eats that largemouth bass. And then at the top of that food chain, the top predator is the alligator who eats that anhinga. This food chain has 5 trophic levels. Each step of a food chain is considered one trophic level. So algae, 1, flagfish, 2, largemouth bass, 3, anhinga, 4, and alligator is the 5th trophic level within this food chain. Now, a food chain isn't necessarily the most realistic depiction of what's happening out in the wild. A food web is more realistic. A food web is a link of all the food chains together. If you see that I've highlighted in red there, you can see our original food chain is there. But now we're seeing a more realistic view of what those animals eat all together. So algae is eaten by more than just a flagfish, it's eaten by several different things. Same with the largemouth bass. It doesn't only eat flagfish, it eats many different things, and so on. And you can see the alligator, which is the top predator of this food web, eats several different species. And then this food web also incorporates a scavenger, which you can see right here. Scavengers are indicated eating dead organisms by those dotted lines. You can also see that we have decomposers in this food chain as well, bacteria or fungi that would decompose everything in this food web. One of the most important things to understand about food webs is that everything is connected. If one animal within a food chain or a food web is reduced or eliminated, it can severely affect all animals within that food web. In this example, the small fish, if they were taken out for some reason, maybe a disease or some kind of pollution in the body of water in which they live, I want you to look at the food web and try to think of all the other organisms that would be affected by that. Okay, so stop and think and look at the organisms and ask yourself who would be affected by the loss of the small fish. Okay, if you notice probably right away that the organisms that eat the small fish would all decrease. Okay, those organisms would then decrease in population, so their predators would also decrease. If the small fish were no longer eating zooplankton, those would increase in numbers. If those increase in numbers, it could cause the increase of other species as well, which could in turn decrease the organisms that they eat, and so on. So one organism in a food web being reduced or eliminated can really affect the entire food web. Thank you for watching this podcast on food chains and food webs. As always, it's a great time to go to Quizlet and help practice some of the words that we just learned.